How's it going today, guys? So today we're going to be talking about inflation. So basically what inflation is, what key factors contribute to inflation, and why you should be aware of the invisible force known as inflation. So in a lot of my videos recently, I've talked about how people who save money in bank accounts are not keeping up with the rate of inflation. And I've had a lot of people asking me to talk more about inflation, kind of explain what it is. So this should give you a snapshot of what inflation is, so you have a better understanding of what it actually is and what causes inflation. So inflation is basically an invisible force that eats away at your wealth and your savings. It's something nobody really pays attention to until you look at the course of many years and you go, oh wow, the buying power of my dollar has changed significantly. Inflation, simply put, is less purchasing power over time. So your dollar is worth less over time. I'm sure if you look at the price of bread in 1930 versus the price of bread today, there's a significant difference in the price. That's one example I've used in my videos previously. So things cost more money over time because the buying power of your dollar or of your currency decreases over time. So those with a fixed income are hit the hardest by inflation because if you're making the same amount of money each year, let's say you have a job or maybe you're on some kind of assisted living and you have the same amount of money coming in every single year, because of inflation you have less buying power each year. Some of us are lucky enough to get a cost of living raise where you get a 2%, 2.5% raise. That's usually common in most jobs. If you're working for a good employer, they'll give you a cost of living raise. Now many people look at that and they go, oh wow, I'm earning more money, I'm making more money. But the truth is, if you're probably just keeping up with inflation or barely outpacing it. So let's say you got a 2.5% raise, but inflation is 2%, you got a 0.5% raise. That's less exciting than saying I got a 2.5% raise because the buying power of your money is decreasing. You're able to buy less with your money. So it's not really like you're getting a 2.5% raise. You're actually getting a much smaller raise, but they're just trying to help you keep up with inflation. So you're earning pretty much the same amount each year, maybe a little bit more if you're lucky based on how much your employer gives you. And if you're someone who's in the unfortunate situation where you have a fixed income, you're being hit the hardest by this invisible force known as inflation. So that is why people invest. That is what investors are out there doing. Investors are out there looking to outpace inflation through appreciation. So an investor will buy into an asset, whether it's a stock, maybe it's a piece of real estate, whatever it may be. They're looking for that piece of an investment, they're looking for that asset to appreciate in value at a rate that outpaces the rate of inflation. Now, people who are investing in stocks are also looking to outpace the market return, because if you're not outpacing the market return, you're not adding any value by picking individual stocks. You might as well just invest in an index fund. But people are looking to, number one, outpace the rate of inflation. That way they're not losing the buying power of their dollar. And then after that, they're looking to have some return on investment after they factor in inflation. So that is the reason why people invest. And unfortunately, not all of us are investing. In fact, most of us are not investing. What most of us do, those of us who have money, we save money. And savers are outpaced by inflation year after year. I'm not going to go into this again. I did a whole video called Why Your Bank Account is the Worst Place for Your Money. The basic reason is the average checking account pays 0.05% interest and inflation averages around 2%. So every single year you're losing the buying power of your money because the interest rate paid by a bank account is not keeping up with the rate of inflation. So savers are outpaced by inflation every single year. They're going to have less money each year, less buying power for that money. Your success as an investor is your return on your investment, what your return is after a year versus inflation for that year. That's how you should look at your success, is you need to consider the fact that inflation is eating away a portion of your money. So maybe you have a 10% return for that year, but inflation was at 2%. You really had an 8% return because you lost 2% of the buying power of your money because of inflation. When inflation outpaces the increase in wages, that's when you get a stagnant economy because people have less buying power. People have less money because things are more expensive. They're spending more of their money, and as a result, we have a stagnant economy. So ideally, you want to see inflation keep pace with an increase in wages. So that's why it's good when many of us have that cost of living raise, because you have about the same amount of money each year to spend. Yes, you have more money, but you have less buying power. So you pretty much have a break even at that point. But if you are not keeping up with inflation, or inflation goes crazy and it's not keeping up with wages, people are going to have less money to spend, and then you have a stagnant economy. Inflation is similar to aging or termites. So think about the fact that when you look in the mirror each day, you pretty much look the same. But then when you hold up a picture of yourself from 10 years ago, you go, holy crap, I got a lot older. That's inflation right there. So if you look at it day by day, there's not much of a difference. But if you compare the prices of things over 10 years, you'll see a huge difference in prices. They creep up slowly over time in increments that we don't notice because it's very subtle in the short term, but in the long term, the difference is astronomical. It's also similar to termites because it's quietly eating away at your house without you noticing, and then all of a sudden your house falls to the ground and you go, wow, I had no idea I had termites. That is what inflation is. It's an invisible force that eats away at your savings. There are actually two types of inflation out there, and the next thing we're going to talk about are the key factors that contribute to inflation. But the first type of inflation is demand pull inflation, and this is when the demand for goods and services rises more rapidly than production capacity. For those of you who invest in stocks, I'm sure you're familiar with supply and demand. When there's a high demand for a particular stock, all of a sudden the price goes up in value because everyone's trying to get their hands on it and the supply is not equal to the demand. So that is exactly what happens with demand pull inflation. So an example of this would be goods or services. So let's say all of a sudden everyone has a lot of money and they decide to do home renovations, and everyone in the area decides, okay, I want a hot tub. And there's only so many hot tubs in that area. Next thing you know, everyone's buying hot tubs and everyone's hiring electricians to wire up these hot tubs. Next thing you know, the demand for that service of an electrician increases and the demand for that good of that hot tub increases as well. So you're going to see electricians charging more money to wire up that hot tub, and you're going to see hot tub sellers increasing the price because of the demand. So that is what's known as demand pull inflation. Then we have cost push inflation. This is when the cost of a production process increases. So one example of this would be some kind of fuel being used. So let's say you're buying groceries and they have to transport groceries from one location to another. If all of a sudden the transportation cost of that process increases, they're going to have to increase the price because they're not just going to eat the loss. They're going to want to make the same amount of money they were selling that particular item. So rather than take a loss, they're going to increase the price of that product. As a result, your money is able to buy less of that product, and that is inflation right there. That is an example of cost push inflation. So when the cost of an individual part of a process increases, that will cause cost push inflation. Now, is inflation a bad thing? Should we be afraid of inflation? We shouldn't be. We also can't prevent it. But it isn't necessarily a bad thing because low or stable inflation is a good thing because it encourages spending, which is good for the economy overall, but it also encourages people to invest their money, which is good for business. If we didn't have to invest our money and we could save $100 and 20 years from now, it would be the same $100 that could buy us the same things, we wouldn't be investing. But because we know that $100 in 20 years will be a lot less than $100 today, we do something with that money. We either spend it today, which isn't the best thing, but we also invest our money because we're looking to outpace inflation. So it's good for the overall economy when people are either spending or investing. However, when we have rapid or unstable inflation, this is bad because this discourages spending and it hurts everyone. It hurts consumers because our savings are eaten away, and it also hurts businesses as well. It hurts everyone across the board. So here are three key factors that contribute to inflation. Number one is the currency supply. So the value of a fiat currency is relative to the supply. I'm going to explain what that means. I've talked about this a lot in my Bitcoin for Beginners video about fiat currencies versus a commodity currency, but back in the day we used to have our US dollar backed by gold, and as such it was backed by a physical commodity that we can't produce more of. So there's no way to make more gold, so as a result it was backed by a finite resource. However, we are no longer backed by a gold standard, and as such we have a fiat currency, also known as a floating currency that's not backed by anything. So the actual value of the fiat currency is relative to the supply of that currency. And if an increase in the supply of this exceeds the growth rate of the economy, the value of that currency falls. That is because the value is relative to the supply of that currency. There's nothing backing that actual currency. We're not backed by gold, we're not backed by silver. There's nothing physical backing our currency other than the strength of our government. So when the dollar is worth less, the goods and services become more expensive. When there is a larger supply of US dollars out there, the goods become more expensive because those dollars are worth less. There's less buying power per US dollar or per piece of that currency of that government currency. This doesn't just obviously apply to the US, this applies to any government or any economy. This is any fiat currency out there. So basically, by diluting the US dollar, you're contributing to inflation because then the US dollar is worth less. Ideally, you would be increasing the supply at the same rate that the economy is growing. The second contributing factor to inflation is our national debt. And this is pretty simple because how do we pay off our debt? Two ways. Number one, higher taxes. And when we raise taxes for businesses, they're going to pass that cost on to the consumer through increase in prices. So if all of a sudden it costs a business more money to produce, they're going to pass that cost on to the consumer. As a result, goods will become more expensive. The second way we do this is printing more money, and as a result, we increase the currency supply, which is going to dilute the US dollar or dilute that currency, so the value is going to fall. The third way is through consumer spending. So when we spend more, we increase the demand for goods and services. We talked about that earlier. And when we see an increase in wages, when people are making more money, we see more spending. So while it does seem like a good thing to increase wages, it's going to push inflation at a faster rate. We're going to see faster inflation when people are making more money. So this is things people have to consider when you hear people talking about people looking to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour. You have to consider how this will actually impact the overall economy, and many people don't think about things like inflation. Think about this, for example. If people who work at a fast food restaurant want to make $15 an hour, and all of a sudden McDonald's or these fast food restaurants are going to have to pay people that wage, they're going to have to charge a lot more for what they're selling. And when the price of goods and services increases, that lowers the buying power of your money. And when those workers have more money and they're spending more money, that's going to increase the demand for goods and services, which is going to really contribute to inflation. So these are things people have to consider and think about when you're looking for a simple solution that really isn't a not so simple solution after all. But I just thought it would be interesting to talk about inflation a little bit and give you guys some of the basics on it. There's a lot more to it, but I just kind of wanted to scratch the surface. So that's all I got for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please drop a like. And if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing to be notified of any future uploads. And as always, I thank you for taking the time to watch this video.